You're traveling through the unknown, a journey beyond the corners of reality, where the shadows whisper and the chill runs deep. Welcome to the dimension where your deepest fears are given form. This is The Midnight Mystery.
Welcome to The Midnight Mystery. Today's episode is called, I Survived a Shipwreck Only to Face Ancient Monsters. In each episode, we delve into the shadowed corners of our existence, bringing you tales of the eerie, the uncanny, and the downright terrifying. From the realms of the supernatural to the depths of the human psyche, no stone is left unturned, no dark secret left hidden. As the clock once again draws near midnight, prepare to embark on another adventure into the uncanny, the eerie, the horrifying, the Midnight Mystery.
Standing on board the Odyssey, I couldn't help but feel out of place. My name is Lucas, a journalist who had seen a lot, perhaps too much, and found himself skeptical of just about everything. As the ship sliced through the Pacific, I leaned on the deck railing, watching the water ripple away from the ship's powerful thrust, my mind constantly wandering. Beautiful, isn't it? A voice interrupted my thoughts. Turning, I found myself face to face with Captain John. The sun had bronzed his skin, and his eyes carried the weight of years spent navigating the vastness of the seas. The ocean always has a way of making one feel small, he commented with a soft smile. I've seen enough of the world to not be easily impressed, I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. Captain John laughed heartily. Ah, Lucas, I've heard about your writings. Always questioning, always doubting. The sea has its mysteries. Some things can't be explained by mere words. Before I could respond, a woman with a wild mass of curly hair and sun-kissed skin approached us. Captain, have you seen this? She held out an ancient-looking map, the kind I assumed she studied, given her title. Sarah, the archaeologist. He took the map and observed it closely. Ah, yes, the old myths of the Pacific, legends and tales of lost civilizations and treasures. Sarah's eyes sparkled with excitement. I believe they're more than just myths, Captain. These legends might hold some truths. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Fairy tales. People want to believe in something more than their mundane lives, so they create myths. Sarah shot me a stern look. Not everything can be dismissed, Lucas. There's a world beyond what's written in newspapers. Before I could counter, a youthful giggle echoed from behind. Mia, the young girl traveling with her parents, darted between us, chasing after a butterfly. Her innocence was a stark contrast to our heated discussion. Mia! A woman, presumably her mother, called out. Don't run on the deck! She halted, gave us an apologetic smile, and trotted back to her parents. Captain John chuckled. See, Lucas, there's wonder in her eyes. It's something many of us lose as we grow. Maybe this cruise will help you find yours. I smirked. We'll see about that. The ship continued its journey, and as days passed, our conversations, disagreements, and laughters filled its decks. None of us knew what lay ahead, but for now, we were simply passengers, each with our own stories, on an adventure across the Pacific. The sky darkened abruptly, casting a gloomy shadow over the Odyssey. The once calm sea now roared with anger. Without warning, gargantuan waves began crashing onto the ship's deck. Panic ensued. Everyone stay calm, Captain John's voice bellowed over the commotion. But it was easier said than done. The ship lurched violently from side to side, sending passengers and crew members scrambling. A sharp jolt threw me to the ground. The sensation of cold water drenched my clothes as another wave washed over us. Desperately, I tried to cling onto a rail, but it was slick and unyielding. Mia! Sarah's frantic voice pierced the chaos. I saw her reaching out to grab the young girl, who was perilously close to being washed overboard. But before she could, both of them were swept away by a forceful wave. The last thing I remembered before blacking out was Captain John, trying to issue commands, fighting against the tempest to save his ship and its passengers. The sky darkened abruptly, casting a gloomy shadow over the Odyssey. The once calm sea now roared with anger. Without warning, gargantuan waves began crashing onto the ship's deck. Panic ensued. Everyone stay calm! Captain John's voice bellowed over the commotion. But it was easier said than done. The ship lurched violently from side to side, sending passengers and crew members scrambling. A sharp jolt threw me to the ground. The sensation of cold water drenched my clothes as another wave washed over us. Desperately, I tried to cling onto a rail, but it was slick and unyielding. Mia! Sarah's frantic voice pierced the chaos. I saw her reaching out to grab the young girl, who was perilously close to being washed overboard. But before she could, both of them were swept away by a forceful wave. The last thing I remember before blacking out was Captain John, trying to issue commands, fighting against the tempest to save his ship and its passengers. I woke up with a throbbing headache, my mouth tasting of salt. My clothes clung to me, drenched and heavy. As my vision adjusted to the glaring sunlight, I realized I was on a sandy beach. Around me, remnants of the Odyssey littered the shore. "Lucas!" a familiar voice called. Turning, I saw Sarah, her hair a wild mess, limping toward me. "Are you okay?" she asked, her face filled with concern. I nodded, trying to push myself to my feet. "What happened? Where are we?" Sarah looked around, her eyes scanning the wreckage and the unfamiliar landscape. "I don't know, but it looks like we've washed up on some island. I can't see any signs of civilization." I spotted Captain John a short distance away, helping Mia, who was sobbing softly. Despite the dire circumstances, the sight of the young girl alive and relatively unharmed brought a small sense of relief. "We need to find the other survivors," Captain John said, approaching us. His usual confident demeanor seemed shaken, but he was trying to maintain composure for the sake of the group. "We should make a shelter," Sarah suggested, "and a signal for rescue." I frowned, trying to shake off the overwhelming feeling of despair. "First, let's gather what we can from the wreckage. There might be something useful." As we began searching through the debris, I couldn't help but feel a sinking sensation in my stomach. We were stranded, with no way to communicate with the outside world. But with Captain John's leadership, Sarah's knowledge, Mia's hope, and my skepticism, we'd have to find a way to survive. The first few days on the island weren't as dire as I had initially anticipated. The island, as unforgiving as its beaches were with the wreckage of the Odyssey, surprisingly offered us fresh water and fruits. "We've lucked out," Captain John declared one evening, holding a coconut. "Nature's providing for us." Mia, munching on a piece of fruit, looked up with a hopeful smile. "Maybe it won't be so bad. Like an adventure?" Sarah, returning from an exploration, had a perplexed expression. "Guys, I found something." She spread out a piece of paper where she had sketched some bizarre cave drawings. "They were deep inside a cave not far from here. They hint at, well, monstrous creatures," she said, pointing to the sketched figures that looked like beasts. "And there's this." She pointed at a continuous circle surrounding the island's depiction. "It might be some barrier or boundary. The drawings made it seem important." I scoffed. "Come on, Sarah, you're reading too much into it. They're just drawings, probably done by some islanders with wild imaginations." Sarah frowned, her hands on her hips. "Lucas, I study ancient cultures. These drawings, they hold significance. They're trying to tell us something." Captain John, ever the mediator, intervened. "Let's not jump to conclusions. It could be anything. But for now, we need to focus on survival and getting rescued." I nodded in agreement. "Exactly. Let's not scare Mia with tales of monsters and magic barriers." Mia, however, looked intrigued. "But what if there are monsters, Lucas? Wouldn't that be something?" I chuckled, ruffling her hair. "Kid, if there's a monster here, I'll interview it for my next article." Sarah sighed, rolling her eyes. Typical Lucas, always skeptical. But as the days passed, with the cave drawings in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but wonder. What if Sarah was onto something? The serenity of the island was short-lived. That night, as we all settled into our makeshift tents, the unsettling quiet was pierced by haunting echoes. Soft, eerie sounds that seemed almost inhuman. "It's probably just animals," I whispered, trying to console Mia, who clung to my arm. Captain John looked uneasy. "I've been to many islands, but I've never heard anything quite like that." Sarah, her eyes reflecting the campfire, murmured, "The island has its secrets." Before we could further speculate, a piercing scream erupted, sending shivers down my spine. We all turned to see one of the survivors being dragged away into the dense forest, his screams echoing until they abruptly stopped. The next morning, we gathered around a set of gigantic footprints that led from our campsite into the jungle. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Even Captain John, who I always considered unflappable, looked genuinely worried. "We're not alone on this island," he said gravely. "We need to get out of here, fast." The sense of urgency propelled us into action. I, along with Mia and a couple of other survivors, decided to try our luck with the vast ocean. "We can build a raft," I declared. "It's a long shot, but it's better than waiting here for..." whatever made those footprints. Sarah looked hesitant. "Lucas, remember the drawings, the barrier around the island?" I waved her off. "We don't have much of a choice." The raft came together quicker than I expected. Using logs, ropes from the shipwreck, and some makeshift paddles, we set off. The sea seemed welcoming, and the island grew smaller in the distance. But then, without warning, our raft jolted violently, sending Mia tumbling into the water. Panicking, I reached down, pulling her back up. It felt as though we had hit a solid wall. Paddling forward again, the same force pushed us back, as if an invisible barrier was denying our escape. We were left floating, stunned and terrified. The island, which had seemed a sanctuary just days ago, now felt like a prison. Making our way back to the shore, Sarah approached with a resigned look. "The force field," she whispered. "It's real." "I should have listened," I admitted, feeling a weight of guilt. "Tell me about those legends again." Sarah took a deep breath. Old sailors spoke of an island where time stood still. It was a place where ancient creatures, long extinct elsewhere, were preserved. And around this island was an impenetrable force, preventing anyone from entering or leaving. Captain John looked contemplative. "So we're trapped with creatures from another age?" Sarah nodded. "It seems so. We need to understand more if we're going to survive." Mia, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity, whispered, "The monsters. They're real, aren't they?" I pulled her close. My earlier skepticism all but vanished. "We'll find a way out, Mia. We always do." The nights on the island became a waiting game, each of us fearing we'd be the next to vanish. The monstrous creatures were unlike anything imaginable, a bizarre combination of prehistoric creatures and something far more alien. One evening, as we huddled close to the campfire, a piercing scream rang out. My heart sank when I realized it was Mia. By the time I reached her tent, she was gone. The heavy footprints leading into the forest were the only sign of what had happened. "We have to go after her," I said, panic gripping me. Sarah nodded, grabbing a torch. "We'll find her, Lucas. We have to." Venturing into the forest, we tracked the footprints to a dark, ominous cave. The entrance was littered with belongings from what looked like past shipwrecks, trinkets, clothing, and old weapons. It was as if the island had been claiming victims for centuries. "We're not the first," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Pushing deeper into the cave, the walls were covered in strange symbols, possibly a clue to the creature's origins. But our focus was on finding Mia. A soft whimper led us to a corner where Mia was tied up, her eyes wide with fear. Nearby, the remnants of countless others, bones and personal effects were strewn about, a grim testament to the island's history. I rushed over, untying Mia, her trembling form collapsing into my arms. "It's okay," I whispered, trying to sound reassuring, though my own fear was palpable. Sarah, clutching the torch, said, "We need to get out of here, now." Deep within the cave, the dim torchlight revealed a large, intricate artifact pulsating with an eerie light. It buzzed and hummed, its vibrations palpable in the air. "That's the force field source?" I whispered, my gaze locked onto the artifact. Sarah examined it closely, her fingers brushing the ancient markings. "It looks like a containment device. From what I can gather, it's not just keeping us in, it's keeping those creatures on the island." I frowned. "So someone knew about these creatures and locked them here?" Sarah nodded. "It's plausible. Maybe an ancient civilization realized the threat and devised a way to contain them." But our revelations were cut short by a slow clap. We turned to find Captain John emerging from the shadows, an unsettling smirk on his face. "Well done, Sarah," he began. "Your archaeological instincts are quite sharp, but understanding and acting upon that knowledge are two very different things." Confusion turned to shock as the implications set in. "You knew?" I exclaimed. Captain John's demeanor shifted, becoming darker and more foreboding. "I'm not just a captain, Lucas. I'm a guardian. These creatures, they're my responsibility." The blinding light from the artifact's destruction was barely fading when we heard the shouts from the other survivors. They'd seen the barrier flicker and weaken, a shimmering, translucent wall rather than the formidable force it once was. "We need to go now," I shouted, grabbing Mia's hand. Sarah, still recovering from the ordeal with the artifact, nodded in agreement. "If the barrier's weak, this is our chance." We sprinted towards the beach where remnants of our makeshift raft lay. As we did, Guttural roars echoed from the forest. The creatures, sensing the same opportunity we did, were on the move. "Push the raft," I yelled, and everyone heaved with all their might, sliding it into the water. The creatures were closing in, their massive forms casting nightmarish shadows on the sand. We paddled furiously, and I could feel the familiar force pushing back, but it was nowhere near as strong as before. "Keep going," I encouraged. A loud splash sounded behind us, and turning, I saw one of the creatures breaking through the barrier, while another was repelled, thrown backward into the water. The barrier's fluctuating strength was unpredictable. Suddenly, a sharp jolt threw me off balance. Looking to the side, I realized we weren't the only ones breaking free. Some of the creatures were succeeding too, their monstrous forms moving with surprising grace in the vast ocean. Sarah's voice cut through my shock. "Lucas, paddle! Focus on getting out!" Nearing the edge of the barrier, I held my breath. As we approached, a sharp push tried to repel us back, but with a combined effort, our raft broke through, sending us sprawling but free. Floating in the open ocean, I looked back at the island, its barrier intermittently flickering. Some creatures were still trying to escape. Some survivors were attempting the same, and others weren't so lucky. Sarah's voice broke the silence. "We may have escaped, but now, the world has a new challenge. Those creatures, they're free." And as we floated adrift, waiting for rescue, I couldn't help but wonder about the fate of the world. The ancient horrors once contained were now unleashed. Our survival story was just the beginning.
I hope you enjoyed our episode. I'd like to extend a heartfelt thanks to you, our brave listeners. Your presence in this shared journey into the unknown is what fuels our stories. Your fascination is our motivation. Did this episode send chills down your spine? Then leave your comments, your thoughts and theories, your own midnight mysteries. Your feedback is the beacon that guides us through the uncharted territories of our stories. And if you haven't already, remember to subscribe to our channel. By joining the Midnight Mystery family, you won't miss out on a single chilling tale. As a subscriber, you'll be the first to know when a new episode lurks around the corner, ready to pull you back into the shadowy depths of the unknown. This is the Midnight Mystery signing off, leaving you with a simple reminder. When the clock strikes 12, fear the silence, for that's when our tales come to life. Good night, Midnight listeners, and remember, not all who wander into the dark are lost.